Your party is growing. The political startup, co-led by Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana, is due to have its founding conference at some point later this year. And besides its growing presence in the House of Commons, with the party now boasting 5 MPs, or is it 6? It has also seen around 850,000 email sign-ups since it was launched a month ago. And with the party to be likely to hit 1 million registrations before its founding, it has also been a topic of conversation among the country's chattering classes. And who embodies those people more than Rory Stewart? Here's what the former Tory MP had to say about Corbyn in a recent episode of his hit podcast co-hosted with Alastair Campbell, The Rest is Politics.
Jeremy Corbyn, for all his good qualities, is an extremely flawed person who would be a very, very deeply unfortunate Prime Minister. He is indecisive, insecure. The way in which he handled the anti-Semitism crisis in Labour was a classic example of that. I mean, whatever the rights and wrongs of it were, he was unbelievably slow to get out, clarify, take action, incredibly prickly and defensive at every stage of it.
Jeremy Corbyn would be a bad Prime Minister, says Rory Stewart, the man who helped make David Cameron Prime Minister. Maybe, sit this one out, Rory, maybe backing a guy who became the Prime Minister who then led to Britain leaving the European Union when you are a big Romaniac doesn't really give me much confidence about your capacity to judge politicians and whether or not they're capable of the job. Was Corbyn prickly and defensive of anti-Semitism? Absolutely. Absolutely. At times, too much. And that was because he was basically subject to psychological abuse, including from most of his own MPs, for over 2 years. You don't have to agree with the guy to acknowledge that. And you don't have to agree with the guy to know that if you were in that situation, you'd almost certainly buckle to a far greater extent. I know I would. The former provincial administrator in post-war Iraq, yes, really, I'm still talking about Rory Stewart, went on to say this.
His views on the world are basically those of the hard left of the 1980s. He is instinctively anti-Western. He had very odd views on Russia, very odd views on Syria. And the people that surround him are very, very troubling ideologues. And I'm very close to a lot of the new Labour MPs who put their careers on the line to try to stop that man becoming Prime Minister. Look, I've got a romantic, idealistic enthusiasm for people like Corbyn in the same way as people might want to chant from Glastonbury. But if you ask me seriously, should this guy be running the country? Absolutely not. I mean, for all his qualities, and I like him very much as a person. Every time I see him, I warm to him. I sympathise with him. But I'm not sure that even he is certain that he would make a great minister or prime minister.
No. I think that's right.
Rory Stewart. It makes me laugh, right? Look, I'm really close to these new Labour MPs who are part of the most unpopular government in living memory within 12 months of coming to office. I'm good friends with some of those people. Again, you're not really inspiring confidence in regards to your judgment there, Rory. Corbyn opposes the post-World War II Western order. He doesn't want this country, the UK, to be a dependency, a vassal state of the US and its empire. Again, you might not agree with that, but is that such a bad opinion to have? Personally, I agree with Jeremy Corbyn. I think Britain has basically been humiliated over the last 80 years. And guess who else did agree with Jeremy Corbyn? Charles de Gaulle. You don't have to be on the left to actually arrive at those conclusions. Does that mean Corbyn gets everything right? No. Guess what? Nobody does. But Jeremy Corbyn was right on foreign policy a hell of a lot more than most people in British politics over the last 3 decades, including, by the way, people like Rory Stewart and Alastair Campbell. And on whether he'd be a good minister or not, I personally can't think of anyone better suited in British politics right now who would be a better minister for transport. The guy is a manhole cover enthusiast. I'm not making this up. The same is true for development, local government, even media and culture. He would actually go into those jobs and care about what they're meant to do. He would try his best. He wouldn't look at them as just some stepping stone to higher office. And by the way, that's what you're meant to do, but it's rarely the case. Now we have that all out of the way. There was one thing in that silly tirade that did get me thinking. It's that Corbyn doesn't want to be PM or even a minister. Now, of course, if a new left party is serious, it may indeed come to power as a junior partner. Maybe that would be a coalition. Maybe that would be confidence and supply. If it was the former, then Corbyn would indeed be a minister. It'd be very strange if he wasn't. And if the Left Party has literally no interest in governing, in which case Corbyn would never be a minister, then what's the point? Kieran, what did you make of what Rory Stewart said?
You know, it's almost valiant how steadfastly Rory Stewart refuses to feel the direction in which the wind is blowing. It's almost valiant that he refuses to understand kind of how little people actually want his kind of politics, because it's kind of difficult to work out what Rory Stewart's kind of politics is, among other things. In one sense, he's kind of, I think he would probably think of himself as a sort of timeless liberal conservative or something like that. In another sense, he's at least in my mind, and maybe in yours, Aaron, you can tell me, seared in my memory as a kind of belonging to a very particular moment in time, with people like Dominic Grieve and Damien Green and Theresa May, you know, people who are actually pretty recent phenomena, but they feel like they belong to a different political aeon. You know, they feel, it feels to me at least, I don't know, I'd be interested to hear your view. It feels like it was, you know, a century ago that they were around. And, you know, what do they believe in? What does Rory Stewart believe in? Probably things like probity in public life and, you know, a kind of sort of a genteel capitalism. And I imagine the rest of that crew would say that they subscribe to the same sort of thing. But of course, the problem with it is that it's completely fraudulent, because they supported austerity, they support, more broadly speaking, and they might quibble with this terminology, but, you know, essentially it's unarguable in terms of what they actually voted for when they were in Parliament and what they supported. They support, you know, neoliberalism or austerity nested within neoliberalism. And I think the problem with saying that you're all for probity in public life and genteel capitalism is that nothing has done more to deindustrialize Britain and kind of fray the seams of the social fabric. And if you like, you can go over and say, you know, speed up the process of decline in Britain than those two things, actually. And in so doing, they render their own kind of centrism completely redundant, completely obsolete. And that's where Rory Stewart is now, kind of in a sort of a political ideological vacuum where he says he stands for things that the very things he voted for and supported, in actuality, rendered obsolete. Probity in politics, you know, genteel capitalism, all that kind of stuff. Whenever people think of Jeremy Corbyn, obviously, you know, I say obviously, why should it be obvious? But I broadly very much support him. I don't think he's perfect, but I support Jeremy Corbyn. Of course I do. Whenever people think of him, he is clearly a visionary. He has a visionary conception of politics. Rory Stewart has, I think, the dead end opposite of that.
Yeah, I'm just, as you're saying all of this, you got me thinking about, you said Damien Green, Kieran. And I thought, Damien Green, wasn't that the minister who had a porn addiction? Yes. So, and we're going back now to the kinds of people that, you know, were basically, they were colleagues of Rory Stewart. Damien Green was under May, first Secretary of State in 2017, Minister for the Cabinet Office, 2017, Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. The guy was apparently masturbating in his office to pornography 6 or 7 hours a day. I'm not making this up. I am not making this up. So he's a good minister of the crown. But poor Jeremy Corbyn isn't. A man who, you know, whether or not you like the dude, within a month, he was able to mobilize a campaign to be re-elected in his constituency. He must know what he's doing. But apparently he shouldn't be a minister. But the guy who's on Pornhub 8 hours a day, I guess Damien Green's struggling right now with the changes to identification, that guy could be a minister. If you think of all the complete schmucks that were Tory ministers between 2010 and 2024, but no, Jeremy Corbyn shouldn't be a minister. I think Rory Stewart was prisons minister, right? How'd you do there, Rory? Good job. They're full, by the way. Right. But we can't let Jeremy Corbyn be a minister, please. He thinks that, we should have an independent foreign policy of the United States. How dare he? There are also broader political questions which still remain incredibly unclear with regards to this new party. Is your party, or whatever it's going to be ultimately called, going to be federalist? Or will it have a centralised authority? Kind of an important question to resolve. I want to stick with this story for a minute. Here's a clip from a recent interview with Jeremy Corbyn by the Middle East Eye. In it, they discuss the highly controversial IHRA definition of anti-Semitism.
Zara Sultana did a recent interview where she said that the Labour Party under your leadership was wrong to have adopted the controversial IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. And she said the smears won't work anymore and that she's proudly an anti-Zionist. What do you think about all that?
Well, I think it wasn't really necessary for her to bring all that up in the interview, but that's what she decided to do. The party did adopt the IHRA definition. Personally, I was more in favour of the Jerusalem Declaration, which is simply saying that anti-Semitism is wrong. It is wrong to be anti-Semitic, and it is perfectly possible to discuss the politics and behaviour of the State of Israel without being anti-Semitic. People do that all the time. Indeed, many people in Israel do that all the time. And so our party will have a resolutely anti-racist position, and I'm looking to put some kind of general declaration of respect for all communities, all ethnicities, all languages, all faiths and no faiths. And so it'll be a general anti-racist position. I was under a great deal of pressure to adopt the IHRA. That happened. The majority of the National Executive, a huge majority, including people who are very close to me, wanted it adopted, and that was duly done. And then later, the examples were also adopted, which I personally had the greatest concerns about, because I think a definition that requires examples to give it life and legs shows to me there's something badly wrong with the definition in the first place.
Kieran, I didn't think that was a bad comment, although I opposed the adoption of the IHRA at the time. I went on television and said it was a bad idea to adopt it, particularly the examples. I still think that. I think it's a threat to free speech. But I also get the pressure that Jeremy Corbyn was under at the time. You're going to make some good calls, some bad calls. But someone like Stewart can point to that video as evidence that Corbyn doesn't want to make difficult decisions that make him unpopular. Yes, he's a good campaigner, but ultimately you need somebody with exceptional judgment to lead a political insurgency. What's your view?
So basically, my view on this is that the IHR is obviously a disaster. And adopting it was the wrong decision. Now, that's not to apportion blame to anything or anyone. Obviously, there is enough blame to go around. Let's not go back to that. I think Jeremy is wrong, actually, to say Zara didn't need to bring that up. I think it was right that she brought it up. And, had it been merely a personal attack, fine. But it clearly wasn't. It was a lessons learned kind of statement. And so I think on that basis, it was very legitimate to say, look, as we move forward, especially while Israel is committing genocide, we absolutely must not fall into the same trap again. And so on that basis, I think it was very legitimate to raise it. Now, I haven't picked through her choice of words. I can't say for sure that she stayed away. Jeremy might consider more ad hominem than was necessary. But I think what she would say is there are strategic lessons to be learned, especially in this apocalyptic moment for the Palestinians. We, as a party that wants to become a governing party, or at least challenge power, very seriously needs to internalise those lessons if we want to do that effectively. And so I think it was legitimate to raise it. The IHRA was an absolute disaster. It was an absolute disaster for Palestinians. I'm just going to send to Palestinians all of this for a moment, because it was so much of a discourse was around the political class and so on. So it was a disaster for Palestinians because, in a sense, it laid the ground. It showed the lobby that it could be effective, and it laid the groundwork for where we are now.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. And look, for me, it's really worrying that Corbyn doesn't have a greater capacity for reflection on this. Not so that he can be like, oh, I don't want him to be apologized. I don't want him, Jeremy, I don't want you to apologize. You've got nothing to apologize for. But it would be really great. I think it would inspire real confidence if he said, you know what, we're starting this new party and we're starting it with so much knowledge in the bank. That was a bad call. And he kind of insinuates that wasn't his call. He's right, it wasn't his call. It was people around him saying adopt the IHRA. And if he just said, look, I should have trusted my gut. And that's the lesson I learned from there. That's the lesson I learned from there. I think people would really like that. I think the problem for Jeremy, not with Jeremy, because it's not a problem with him, it's a problem for him, is that he's been under such relentless attack for so long, it's really hard for him to discern what is productive disagreement from what is a personal attack, because he's just been subject to so many personal attacks. I really feel for him. I think if you or I had been through what he's been through, we'd be the same, probably worse. But the point is, if you want to lead a political party and disrupt the political status quo in this country, that ain't going to work. You're going to need lots of constant critical reflection on what you're getting wrong. You're getting most things wrong most of the time. The point is, how do you learn from the feedback and how do you make sure those mistakes don't happen again? And that's critical. And if you don't do that in politics or indeed anywhere else, you're not going to go very far. And I'm saying this to somebody, I'm 41, Jeremy Corbyn's 76. He's achieved a hell of a lot more with his life than I have. But I think that's really, really important. That's really, really important. Not for him to keep his constituency. He'll do that. He's loved. He's a great constituency MP. If you're trying to organize a credible party to shape the country's politics, I don't mean 5 or 10 MPs, I mean 30, 40 plus, you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to be capable of that. And I think that's a reasonable criticism of Jeremy Corbyn right now. The other stuff, oh, he wouldn't be a very good minister. Like I say, Jeremy, I think he'd be a fantastic transport minister. Who knows if that ever comes to pass.